Hi, thank you, Laura. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you for joining us today. I'll give you a very brief introduction about WINGS and about the topic to pass on to Jake's great tool. WINGS is a network of associations and support organizations around the world. We currently have about 90 members in over 30 countries in every region. And WING's mission is to promote, strengthen, and provide leadership for philanthropy infrastructure around the world. And we do that through sharing information, peer learning, knowledge, and programs like webinars such as this one. One of WING's core activities is closely linked to the Foundation Center and is related to data collection in the philanthropic field. For instance, we surveyed WING's members and found that they represent over 22,000 foundations and other kinds of philanthropic organizations around the world. And that our network mobilized over almost $140 million. And that even though most of our members are in Europe and North America, membership has been growing most in the Asia-Pacific, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Arab region. We also found that there's a difference between associations and support organizations in terms of staff. Whereas the membership organizations tend to have a smaller size staff and support organizations have large staff. And one way to see this kind of information is just like this. We just write the words and put them here. But it's a lot more interesting to see it presented more visually. And this map here shows what we've done with that kind of information and what we can do in a very visual way with infographics or pictures with the information you have. And this image you can see here evolved from this one. You can see there's a lot less information. And we do have more information now as the response rate to our surveys has increased a lot. And a key driver for this increase was presenting data in a pleasant and user-friendly way. This included creating a new membership map for WINGS in partnership with the Foundation Center. So with this new map, you can search by organization type, by number of members, by budget, or the service they offer, the region they're in. So there are several more features, and people can have different options, basically, to search and look for the information they want. And that's why we're so excited about the Foundation's map. It's a tool that can really help organizations organize and present their data in a very user-friendly way, and that will encourage people to provide information. So I think we're all looking forward to hearing Jake and his demonstration about the Foundation's map. Jake, over to you.
Being asked to build actually weren't meeting a need out in the field. So what we decided to do is do some user research. It's part of a kind of a suite of skills that's called user experience or UX. And so we went out to the field here, just here in New York, and we called a few people outside of New York who were either program officers at foundations or grants managers or executives, and went on site and looked, saw their office and saw what kind of things they did, and asked them questions about what was frustrating, what they wanted to do. We interviewed 40 people at foundations about a year ago. So everybody has something slightly different to say, but the thing that was most common, I would say, was that I think out of the 40 people, 30 people said they really wanted help scanning the landscape, like literally like verbatim of those particular words. They wanted to scan the landscape. And most people, it meant kind of the same thing. They wanted to see what's going on with health funding around the world or with education funding in Georgia or just something like that. So they also wanted help with figuring out collaboration partners. How can they get their grantees to collaborate? What other nonprofits are working on the ground? What other foundations are working on a similar subject area as them in the same geography? For instance, who else is working on civil rights in Brazil, that kind of thing? And they wanted to figure out, when they go to the next conference, who they might, try to find when they're gathered. Also, there's the idea of vetting and discovering potential grantees and grant makers. The idea being, you know, okay, we got a grant application from this nonprofit based in Ghana, but do we know who else has been giving them funding in the form of grants over the last, 5 years? That's the kind of exercise that we hear a lot of people needed help with. And then generally strategic planning. Like, where can we put our money to use that would be most needed? Should we be going into the water, sanitation, hygiene space in Ghana, or is it covered well enough by other funders, and maybe it's better to go into Algeria or to some other country in Africa? So that's the kinds of questions that we got, and then we kind of crystallized that a little bit into specific questions that we would build an app and try to answer some general questions, then we got a little more specific. For instance, how can we help our members, and this might be actually appropriate for you guys, how can we help our members learn who else is funding what they care about? How can we help our members understand the funding landscape in a particular area? And how can we help our members learn how funding in different areas has evolved over time? So in this case, what we're thinking is for Wings members, and then for your members' members, essentially. And we do lots of applications where we build a version of Foundation Maps for membership groups within the United States, let's say for foundations in Oregon or foundations in California. But I think this is very applicable to member organizations that are focused on issues and funders outside of the United States. So I'm going to show you guys some slides on Foundation Maps. This was just released in September, so it's relatively new, and we are working on it constantly and feeding it data and getting user feedback to improve processes and add new features on requests. And I'll go over the major features in the application that should be of interest. So in this screenshot, what we're looking at is recipients located around the world. And this, on top here, you can see there's, let me see if I can get this drawing tool together. There are bubbles here, and each of these bubbles represents funders located in, can somebody mute on the phone? I'm getting a lot of background noise. Great, thank you. These bubbles represent locations of recipients in different countries, and we can see in this case there's basically 3.9 million grants, $271 billion, 30,000 funders, and 238,000 recipients. So these numbers are actually pretty big. A lot of it's based in the United States, but there's a growing number of non-U.S. data that we're gathering in all the time. So we'll go and explore some of that in a second. Let me get to the pointer here. So basically, when you're looking at the map and you drill in, like you zoom in, there are bubbles on the map, and they kind of get smaller and smaller, and you can basically drill all the way in until you get to the street corner where a foundation or a nonprofit is located. In this case, we're just zoomed into the map a little bit, focused on the Middle East, and we're seeing bubbles, and each of the bubbles represents, I believe, a province in these countries. And you can just keep zooming in all the way to get down to the street corner if you're looking at a certain neighborhood. But of course, that doesn't help explain everything. In most cases, people want to know something a little bit broader. So let's take one use case scenario, and let's say that you wanted to figure out who is making and receiving grants related to health. So what you would do, and let me get the drawing thing here together. What you do is you go to the subject area up here and you type in the word health. And what ends up happening is it adds it as a little card right here. Let me erase that so it doesn't block it too much. But basically, it would add these filters. You can just keep adding more subjects and sub-subjects. So it could go into, tuberculosis under health if you wanted to. So we can see here that for health, the data we've got around the world, we got 225,000 grants, $28 billion, 18,000 funders, and 27,000 recipients. So it's pretty good. You can see there's obviously a big bubble in the United States. There's a cluster of bubbles in in Europe, but there's also, recipients for health grants in Brazil, Argentina, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, India. So they're all over the world, and so this is part of the landscape. It doesn't tell the whole story. It just kind of gets you kind of a beginning flavor. And then at any time, what you can do is click on any of the bubbles and actually get information about the recipients inside that bubble or that country. So if you were to click on the bubble for Nigeria, you would get, a little summary of what's in Nigeria, and then you can explore the data and the grants that way. And we'll show some examples of that kind of data that you get when you click on the bubbles in just a second. So let's say that we just went to the list view for this, and again, this is worldwide funding for of health grants. So what we have here is you see the top funders to recipients around the world with health grants, and some of these names will be familiar, probably Gates Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. These are mostly U.S.-based funders. We can see where they are, and we can see the dollar value of the grants and the number of grants. So in this case, the Gates Foundation has given $8 billion, this is since 2006, has given $8 billion and 1,742 grants. And again, you can click on them and get some details. Let's look at the recipients, the top recipients of health grants around the world. Now, this one, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, based in Geneva, has received $1.3 billion in grants, but only 3 grants. So let me try to highlight that here. So only grants, but those grants obviously were pretty sizable. And a lot of these are based in New York. A lot of these are based in the United States or in Europe, but actually do activities that are outside of New York, and outside of the United States and outside of Europe, so maybe in Africa or South America or in Asia. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can discover that kind of information. So let's say we wanted to do something more specific. And because WINGS is based in Brazil, I decided to use Brazil as an example. But let's say we wanted to combine a subject with the location. So what you do is in the section that is, let me get back to the pin tool. You go to the location and you can type in Brazil. You go to the subject area and you can either explore the subjects. There's an area right here where you can explore subjects and figure out which one's right for you, but you can also start typing. In a lot of cases, the big topics that you understand will probably be in there. So in this case, we can see we're looking at Brazil and civil and human rights, and we can see that there have been 603 grants, $82 million, 39 funders to 351 recipients. So we can see right off the bat that there's actually a small number of funders to a relatively large number of recipients. That's not always the case. In some cases, it's the opposite. Sometimes there are a small number of recipients and a large number of funders, especially in the cases of universities, things like that. So we can actually see by the bubbles here that actually the number of recipients of human rights grants is actually pretty well distributed across Brazil. It's not all concentrated in Sao Paulo and Rio and the other large cities. There's actually there's a lot of stuff, so human rights grants going to recipients located in Amazonia, for instance. So let's look at these are the top funders for civil and human rights grants in Brazil. We can see here by the title it says that. The top funders we have in our database, there are some U.S. foundations here, Kellogg and the Ford Foundation. There's also the Brazil Human Rights Funds, who gave $1.47 million. We also have ELAS. I might get some of these pronunciations wrong. I apologize in advance. And here's actually a funder in the Netherlands. He's also given some money. And again, you can explore these guys. You can figure out what it is, where their priorities have been, and understand more about that this is part of the funding landscape. So it's not just, U.S.-based funders. There's actually funders based in England, Switzerland, California, Brazil, and the Netherlands. So let's look at what happens when you click on one foundation and you want to figure out more about what they're about, where they are, what kinds of activities they do, and then specifically what grants they're making for the subject that you're talking about. In this case, the Kellogg Foundation, based in Michigan, in the United States. And here's a brief description of their mission. And you can also look at the grants. But one of the things that we found that is interesting is just to see, for nonprofits and foundations, what is the distribution of their funding across subjects? And in this case, the Kellogg Foundation is a pretty big foundation, and you can see by this chart that actually it's pretty well distributed. It's actually pretty. There's lots of these different petals on this. We kind of call this a windrose. It's kind of like there's lots of petals. So actually, it's pretty diverse. There's health funding, education funding, community development, human services. Here's civil human rights. So there's actually a lot of stuff they do, and it makes sense. They're a big foundation. They've got lots of programs. In other cases, you'll see foundations, and there'll only be one or two bars or petals on the flower that shows that they're really focused in one particular area, and then how much. And then, of course, from here you can click on these and get information about, for instance, their education or their health grants. Let's go look at another aspect of this. This is recipients. This is the top recipients in Brazil of civil human rights grants. So again, my Portuguese is terrible or non-existent, so I won't try to pronounce some of these. But Fundo Brazil here, the second one, $4.9 million and 8 grants. So this is actually, now we're just looking at foundations, nonprofits, based, all of them are based in Brazil. And then we can see who the top funders are. You can sort by the number of grants. There might be some who receive lots of small grants, that kind of thing. And then you can explore these nonprofits that way. So again, we're starting to dive in a little bit. At first, you look at the big picture, the big summary of what's going on in Brazil with this topic. You look at the big funders, you look at the big recipients, and then you can start to explore individual institutions. And here we're looking at one of the recipients. Actually, it says grantmaker on top. It's really a recipient. And this recipient, you can see here, compared to the Kellogg Foundation, this recipient's primarily focused on civil and human rights. This is like a very focused nonprofit. Almost all the money they get in grants is for civil and human rights. Another question that gets asked a lot is, well, okay, great, we see that funding. There's a fair amount of funding, let's say, for civil and human, or for any given topic. And this is on the label is actually incorrect. It's actually civil human rights in Brazil. Let me make sure I emphasize that. This is civil human rights in Brazil. So let's say, okay, we know the money. We know there's $82 million. That actually, what's going on? Is it going up? Is that healthy? Is that not healthy? So if you look at this chart over here, we can see the number of grants. Well, it looks like the number of grants spiked, and the number of grants is pretty good. Where this dotted line is, it shows that we're still collecting the data for 2013, 14, et cetera. But we're looking now at civil and human rights, the amount of money, and you see there's this huge spike in 2009, and then it went back down again. So, okay, what happened? What happened in 2009, and what's going on, and how do we figure out what does that mean, and who got that funding, and what's happening? So we go next, and basically you can click on 2009, and we can see this is that spike. There's $25 million given to this nonprofit in Brazil, and then another $1.6 million. So this actually means that that spike in 2009 was basically due to these fairly sizable grants, and they might be kind of anomalies, meaning they might be a rare occurrence that kind of spiked up the numbers, but generally speaking, it looks like it's not something that's regular year over year giving. I also wanted to make sure we showed an example of a single grant record. Basically we've got 3.9 million of these things. It shows that the Ford Foundation, again, let me get the tool here. The Ford Foundation has given to the Federal University of Rio. There's a dollar amount. There's the year it was awarded, the duration of the grant, The subject coding, this is our taxonomy. So we got civil human rights, advocacy, general civil human rights, urban community development, urban studies, and poverty studies. The population served, economically disadvantaged, and then type of support. This generally means, you know, how the money is spent. Sometimes it's general operating support, and sometimes it is something more specific, and you know, some kind of capital investment. And then I think for a lot of folks, what is a lot more important is the grant description. So in here, they're usually, you know, they can be a short phrase or a paragraph. But this says, for the assessment of pro-poor human rights urban policies and programs in 3 Brazilian cities, and for alternative scenario planning in the context of mega sporting events in Rio de Janeiro. This actually has some very strong keywords that when you start to search for it, actually might be interesting, like, you know, sporting events, scenario planning, you know, assessments, cities, that kind of thing. So this is where, you know, it can get a little bit richer, and this is basically you're getting into the weeds a little bit more. And some folks love reading, you know, hundreds of these a day. Some folks only want to see the big picture stuff. But this helps you kind of figure out if the data you're looking at really is data that's significant to you. Is this telling the story of civil and human rights grant making in Brazil, or is this maybe this doesn't count? Maybe this is not exactly the kind of data that you're looking to create or looking to demonstrate to somebody else. Another way to look at it, and this might be particularly relevant to members of WINGS, is you can also look at foundations based in different locations rather than recipients in locations. So in this case, we're looking at the data we've got on foundations located in the United Kingdom. And this is just a part of the screenshot. We can see here Big Lottery Fund, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, Sigurd Rousing Trust, etc. So the grant data we've collected from Big Lottery Fund, we've got $3.4 billion basically, and 43,000 grants. And if we look at the Big Lottery Fund, look at their kind of subject breakdown, we can see again, like several other large funders, they have kind of a well-distributed array of subjects that they give grants for. And then finally, one of the newer features that we've got that we're pretty excited about, you remember one of the questions we had earlier was about the ability to collaborate. And what we wanted to be able to do is figure out a way to show the connections between foundations and nonprofits. We figured that might be a good way to collaborate. Because yes, you can see a list view. In this case, this is grant makers funding organizations in the UK in support of civil and human rights. So we've got Atlantic Philanthropy, Sigurd Rousing Trust, Joseph Rowntree. Yes, we can see who the top funders are, but how are they connected? And how do I fit into this if your foundation or foundation you know happens to be in the data set in some way? So over on the left side here, right side, the opposite, there's a little icon. Looks like a little network icon. And that little icon basically links you to what we call pathways. So if you were to click on that, what ends up happening is you go to this other view. So let's say we clicked on Sigurd Rousing Trust back in that previous view, and what we can see here is who are their top 3 recipients in the UK for civil and human rights funding. It's these guys, in this list. It's Institute for War and Peace Reporting, Reprieve, and Global Witness. Well, who are their top funders other than Sigurd Rousing Trust? So it's Atlantic Philanthropies, King Bedouin, Forward, Rowntree, Open Society, two of the Open Society foundations. So this means that there are 2 degrees of separation apart. So they might actually be people worth collaborating with because you're already funding some of the same nonprofits. And then another question comes up, well, who's Atlantic funding? Let's say that you work with the Rousing Trust. You're 1 degree or 2 degrees separated from Atlantic. Well, who's Atlantic funding for this that I'm not funding? So Atlantic is funding, these 3 nonprofits. The Ford Foundation is funding these, a couple of nonprofits that you're not funding. So this is kind of a way to explore, who's your cohort funding that you're not funding. And then you can just keep exploring it this way, and you can start to see the connections between the foundations and the nonprofits in ways that we weren't able to see before, which a lot of folks have found pretty interesting. We've heard stories from foundations using this to kind of find partners and find other nonprofits that they might be interested in. In some cases, we know that relationships between foundations and nonprofits is a very, it's a human enterprise. It's not just lists and spreadsheets. There's a lot of people who know people, and this helps kind of get a little closer to figuring out who else you might know, who else you might be connected with, and how folks that you end up running into at conferences or other kinds of meetings, how you guys might be connected. So finally, I wanted to discuss what we call a special look. And the idea here is that we want people to be able to use the application, watch the videos and try it out and kick the tires on it. It's a subscription product. There's a couple of different price points depending on how many of the functions and features you want. But what we want to be able to do is open it up for anybody who's listening to this webinar to be able to get a login and be able to go in and use it for 1 week starting tomorrow. So what we'd like to do is, if you guys could email me, and here's my email address, jkg@foundationcenter.org. Actually, we might actually be getting, I think we're actually getting a list from Laura and Anna at Wings, but we will maybe reach out to you guys. We'll reach out to you guys and ask you if you want to sign up for a 1 week look, and then you can respond to us and opt in, and then we'll set you guys up, give you the username and password, and you can try it out to your heart's content. That's all the questions. That's all the slides I have. Do you guys have any questions for me? Is there, Laura or Anna, is there a way to solicit questions from the internet system?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Jake. Thank you very much for the presentation. Actually, we have 2 questions at the moment, and I encourage people to type them or to raise their hand if they want to speak through the microphone. So I'll start with the 2 questions that we have right now. So Steve was asking, by foundation, do you mean all private sector, corporate, operating, standalone funding? Do you include any government source funding? And then,
okay. Yeah, so go ahead.
With the second, because it's from the same person. Everything is nation-based in terms of categories. What about global transnational activities? And what about trans-issue topics such as transformational change? Any thoughts how this could be addressed?
And Jake, just a note that the questions are on the chat box, so if you click on chat, you can actually read the questions, and to everyone in the webinar, if you want to send questions through the chat box, feel free to. And just a quick note, Jake, your Portuguese was really good.
Oh, well, thank you. I promise to improve the next one. Okay, so the first question, by foundation, do we mean private sector funding, or do we include any government source funding? As of right now, we do not include government source funding. There are plans to include information in the near future related to the OECD, so the DFID or the USAID, that kind of funding. But usually that's from country to country. We might end up doing something where it's government funding to nonprofits, but currently that's not what Foundation Maps has. But what we do have is community foundations, corporate foundations, private independent foundations, and operating. So I guess to answer your question, it is non-governmental funding across in Foundation Maps. The other one, everything is nation-based in terms of categories. What about global transnational activities? That's a great question. So in Foundation Maps, you can look, actually I want to make sure you can actually, that I mentioned this, you can type in a city, you can type in a province, you can type in a county or the equivalent of a county that's below a province. And so you can end up getting the locations, again, it's just locations of recipients. What we're actually going to be rolling out, which won't be available in the demo this week, but actually we're rolling it out in the next few months, is what we're calling geographic area served. Geographic area served is more than the location of the recipients. So it would mean if you've got a funder in Geneva and a recipient in Kenya, but the project is for all of Africa, then you'd be able to look up Africa and that grant would show up. A lot of grants are intended for research to eliminate, let's say, to eradicate a disease. Typically, those are not regional based. They are worldwide issues, and those grants are also in there and be discoverable that way. And then there are some grants that are multi-country or just regional, like say for the Middle East. Again, we want to make sure we break it out of the recipient focus and into the geographic focus overall of the grant. So that's something to look forward to. Again, it won't be available in the demo next week, but that is coming soon, and it's a good question. People ask it quite frequently, and it really is the basis for better strategic decision-making than just recipient location. Is there anything else?
Jake, I have here another question for you. Actually, two. So here from our office, we're interested to know, as you build this tool, could you identify any trends in funding and presence of a specific focus foundation? Is there anything outstanding, for example?
Is there anything outstanding? That's a good question. What have I seen? Well, I've actually seen that there's the thing that's interesting that I've seen a lot is that there's these networks of funders. And in some cases there can be like sometimes you can follow the money from a foundation to a nonprofit, then another foundation, then to another nonprofit, and that kind of creates a little network. In some cases, everybody's kind of connected in some way. You know, the way actors are connected in movies in some way. You know, if you go to movie to movie and actor to actor. However, in some cases, in particular, I think it was in Ghana related to water, sanitation, and hygiene. But there are just some networks. Sometimes the overall network can be split into two, and there's basically two different universes of funders and nonprofits. So it's not that every foundation is connected to all their nonprofits directly. So we've seen a fair amount of that. Some places, all the funders give to all the nonprofits, essentially, you know, so it's a really tightly wound kind of group. And, you know, obviously when you get the Gates Foundation, a few of the other big funders in there, you'll see really big spikes in funding, but there's a lot, and as we collect more data from non-U.S. foundations, the story is getting a lot richer. So I think that the most interesting thing I've seen so far is kind of how these networks work out together and how there's little kind of sections of funders and nonprofits who work well together, and then as opposed to another little clique of foundations and nonprofits. It's really fascinating to see that stuff.
Thank you, Jake. Talaya is asking if you can review the pathways again.
Sure. Okay. So I'll start back here again. So in this case, let's say we use Foundation Maps to narrow the data down to something where it's just funders based in the UK, nonprofits, the recipients of grants based in the UK who are in support of civil and human rights. And let's say here are the top funders to recipients in the UK. So let's say we've got Atlantic and Sigrid Rousing and Roundtree, et cetera. So we've got these foundations, and let's say we clicked on the Pathways button. Again, I'll click that over here. Pathways is here. And then go next. And so then what it does is it creates this Pathways thing, and it kind of animates. These little arrows will animate when you see it in real time, and shows the direction of funding. So this up here is, let me draw a little arrow, let's see if this works. This right here is the top recipients of civil and human rights funding, top recipients in the UK of civil and human rights funding by the Sigrid Rousing Trust. And then who are their other top funders other than Sigurd Rousing? We got Atlantic Philanthropies gave money to Institute for World Peace. Ford Foundation looks like gave money to Global Witness. Open Society gave money to Global Witness, that kind of thing. So here we can see that looks like Ford, Atlantic, all these guys are basically just 2 degrees of separation from Sigurd Rousing Trust, meaning there's what they have in common is that they all of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. These 7 foundations are connected in some way, and it's based on these common 3 recipients. Now, not all of them gave to all 3, but the real common ingredient is Sigurd Rousing. So Atlantic also gave to the Queen's University of Belfast Foundation. These guys did not get any money from the Rousing Trust. So maybe I draw a really big arcing thing and I have to put a big X on it. That did not happen. Not that it should have happened, but what's interesting to Rousing is, I'm kind of connected to Atlantic, but who else are they giving money to? It's these guys. So this list is actually could be really interesting for a foundation. Who is my cohort giving to that I'm not giving to? And similarly, the first question is, what foundations might I be relatively well connected to? I know I just drew a lot of stuff on here, so I apologize for that. Messy. But the idea is, and then you can actually keep exploring. You can click on any foundation or any nonprofit and kind of put them in the first position. You can keep exploring. You can click on this and get that data. Atlantic's money that given to Institute for World War and Peace Reporting. You can click on the Atlantic Philanthropies itself and put them over into the first position. So basically, it's pretty dynamic. You can just keep clicking through and just see how everybody's connected. It's pretty interesting. It helps you kind of discover potential partners a lot easier. Does that help answer the question or demonstrate it again?
Thank you, Jake. She says yes, thanks. Actually, do you want to address the question to Jake again, that part of the question from the previous one on transformational change? If you want, you can speak up. You're not muted, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Jake, thanks. It's a great tool, and congratulations. I have some appreciation of the amount of work this takes. I also am aware of the challenges in creating the taxonomy. And I'm just wondering, like one of the topics I deal with, I often deal with what's called process issues, such as transformational change. And these are trans-issue topics, as your taxonomy suggests. Is there any thoughts you have about how those are dealt with, or whether the taxonomy can include such things, or whether there's any way to make comments on the taxonomy?
Sure. Now, I just want to make sure I have it right. So the trans issue, you mean like maybe it's health and education?
Well, there are issues, like the issue of transformational change is something that is an issue in all of that's a topic in all of the issues. How do we realize transformational change in health, in education, human rights, etc.? So it's a process about how we address the issues rather than thinking of the issue as being, like a physical thing that you're doing.
I see. It's a tough question. I mean, taxonomy by nature is putting things into buckets, and so it can be so rigid as to make the data kind of uninformative. It's informative in some way, but then it's like it takes out this nuance. I'll answer it in a couple of ways. Each grant, right now in Foundation Maps, each grant gets is shown by one taxonomy item out of the 1,100 terms in the taxonomy, as far as the subject goes. There's also a type of support which actually shows the mechanism by which they are given the funding. So sometimes it actually implies something about kind of a research-based focus on the grant or some other kind of forward-looking thing rather than just like giving them money to keep the lights on or to do one specific program. However, each grant also can have multiple subjects, so you can look at the cross-section of individual subjects. But I actually think that to answer your question the best way is something that we actually do a fair amount on a special projects basis. we'll get, let's say that in the simplest case, we'll get a request from a reporter, and they'll say something like, tell us quickly the difference between funding for gun rights versus gun control. And it's not it's not in our taxonomy. You know, we don't have a gun rights and gun control. I don't think we have both of those in the taxonomy. But it's a question that people really wanted to answer, and they wanted to answer quickly because there's news articles coming out about legislation last year. So it ended up being kind of a special research project. We dug into the data, talked to the client, and figured out some kind of custom way of figuring out how to make sense out of our data that's been put in these rigid buckets with some text, and kind of massage out something that could kind of make sense out of like comparatively how much money is going for these things. But in a larger sense, what we did with, we did a democracy project in the United States where we got a group of 8 funders together. And in our taxonomy, we have a couple of things related to human rights and to democracy, but what we didn't have, and voting, but these 8 funders together were, each one of them brought their own lens and expertise in some aspect of democracy and their perspective on democracy funding. And so we kind of sat in rooms and hammered it out over the course of several months. We basically created a new taxonomy, a sub-taxonomy all its own that combined and mashed together all the other stuff that we had and all the kinds of nuances, and then got the foundations themselves to give us their data, give us richer descriptions of the data, and then put it into the new kind of, this new kind of format that they've been talking about. And that actually got to the bottom of it, because at best, you know, if we impose a taxonomy of our own, everybody's going to be a little bit unhappy. But if you get groups of foundations who are like-minded and can actually get down and kind of hammer it out, it's almost like hammering out legislation in a way, that you can actually get to the bottom of it. So I think that in some cases, like the one you're describing, I think that getting a group of funders together and then kind of reimagining what that kind of taxonomy would be, what does that include and how do you define it, I think that'd be the best way. And then you kind of create a new version of Foundation Apps just showing those kinds of processes.
Great, that's very helpful. I have another question, but I'll just pause because maybe somebody else has a question first.
Yeah, let me then go and make a question that Samira Mera put into the message here. She says, I might have missed this as I joined a bit late. Does the tool also have the ability to track the impact created or achieved of the funds that are granted?
Not as of yet. This is a good question that also comes up a lot, is that can we show impact? What we do for the United States, we've got some demographics, indicators, like poverty rates, per capita income, that kind of thing. What we don't have is the actual impact, and I think that's something that we're going to develop and start to try to put into this application probably next year when we get to, to get some basically agreed upon outcomes from foundations. We'll also be tying in some of the reports that we've got through part of the foundation center is called Issue Labs. So we've got reports from foundations. I think that's a pretty vital one because outcomes is kind of an ongoing conversation about, and it's not completely standardized. So I think that these reports that come from foundations and nonprofits actually will go a long way. So let's say you're looking up water and sanitation in Ghana, you'd also have, while you're looking at the grants there, look at some reports that come from foundations about the status of what's actually going on the ground. Anything else? I see there's another question here.
I think there is the last one from Steve. He's asking if you're aware of I guess, of this tool that he's citing here from the Monitor Institute and Rockefeller Foundation developed the online tool called the Strategy Landscape that analyzes grants at the strategic level. This is extremely useful for creating coherence among foundations. If you're aware of this, and do you envision anything similar?
This is a great question, and actually kind of one of the reasons why we built Foundation Apps. It wasn't completely in response to Strategy Landscape, but it was kind of trying to tackle the same problem. Getting foundations to actually work at a strategic level together and figure out, the gaps and the overlap. With Strategy Landscape, the difficult thing that Monitor experienced, and they wrote a kind of a white paper about it, was that they actually didn't get a very wide level of adoption among foundations. We found that taxonomy stuff takes a lot of negotiation and lots of difficult conversations. Difficult not meaning like, terrible, but, breaking down the assumptions about what words mean in terms of like how you put things into whatever kind of categories is very time consuming, and it requires lots of thinking out. Is this money done to make a change? Is this money done to sustain? Is this money done to move the needle? We had a big debate about whether we would categorize grants as conservative or liberal. And we decided against it in the end because it was becoming too political. But this is the kind of thing that actually happens when you actually engage with foundations. So Strategy Landscape by itself was a great tool, was a great visualization. It was really cool, but it ended up not getting widely adopted. And one of the things that I think was because of it simply, there needs to be a lot of human effort in helping people come to agreement about certain things. However, what we are doing with Foundation Maps, as it grows, we're going to be constantly rolling out new visualizations and features and listening to the customers and users and figure out other new visualizations that might be helpful. It's really helping narrow down that gap and the overlap and trying to define what does a good, healthy, let's say, what does healthy civil and human rights funding in Brazil look like? What should it look like compared to what it looks like now? Talking to experts, and they'll say, you know what it should look like? There should be $800 million more being spent here every year, for instance. That would be one easy one. Or I wish there were more funders, or the number of funders equal the number of recipients, or that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing we want to start to kind of flesh out and reveal. Strategy Landscape was super cool, and it's a shame. I think it's a shame it didn't get as much traction as it could have. But it was definitely something here that we reference all the time.
Thank you so much, Jake. I think that's it for now. It was a rich, full discussion. We have some questions. I want to thank you for your participation.